These are, like I say, all from Sophia Morrison's Manx.
You want to give a little bit of background about her?
Yes, Sophia Morrison, this was a book published in 1911, was a Manx cultural activist and archivist and folklore collector, and she was one of the people who was instrumental in making sure these tales actually made it down the line. And you'll see in the Twitter thread, this is her only book, and this is the only book you see of Manx fairy tales. It's a very, very small community, and it's a Gaelic splinter community in a couple of very interesting cultural ways.
Manx... Oh no, you said the word archivist. She's a Manx archivist.
She's a Manx archivist. It writes itself, doesn't it? I can actually see it unspooling.
Running away from England, getting tired of things.
Yes,
oh,
of course.
God. Oh God.
Of course. Yeah, Manx Gaelic doesn't exist. I actually had friends who studied it at GCSE.
But it's no longer considered a living language, is it?
Oh no, it hasn't been for almost a century. Basically, to study Manx Gaelic, you basically take 3 or 4 bits of Irish Gaelic and Frankenstein them together and kind of hope for the best. And that's kind of what the Isle of Man does. Culturally, it's about 60% Irish, and about 20% Viking, and about 20% Liverpudlian, and about 3% Hill. I grew up in a very strange place, and these stories will demonstrate some level of that high strangeness. Also, the Twitter thread has links to every single location I'm about to talk to you about, and do take a look at them, because even though it rains like 96% of the time,
and is windy 112% of the time,
and is a hill, the island is really nice.
We have Be Told slag calligraphy.
You are the best. You're the best. Thank you.
Oh, I love these.
Am I clear?
You are clear.
Okay.
The Manx Archives is a podcast. No, you have to read that. You have to read that.
Hold on. The Manx Archives is a podcast distributed by Rusty Quill and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share Alike 4.0 International License. And I'll do that again with a less subtle hint. The Manx Archives is a podcast distributed by Rusty Quill. Released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share Alike 4.0 International License. Okay, I'm going to go now. The coming of St. Patrick. It was the time that St. Patrick was coming on horseback to Man over the sea from Ireland. When he drew near to the land, Manannan MacLear, that great wizard that was ruler of Man, put a charm out of him that made the air around the island thick with mist. He still bloody does that too, so that neither sun nor sky nor sea nor land could be seen. Patrick rode into the thick of the mist, but try as he would, he could find no way out of it. And behind him there was a great sea beast waiting to swallow him up. He didn't know in his 7 senses where he was, east or west, and was for turning back when there came to his ears, the cry of a curlew, calling, "Come you! Come you!" Then he said to himself, "The curlew will be down feeding among the rocks. She'll be calling to her young." After that, he heard the bleat of a goat. "Beware! Beware! Beware!" And he said to himself, "Where the goat bleats for the fall of her kid, there will be a steep bit of hill." Last of all, he heard the crow of a cock. "Come to us! Come, come!" "Then," said Patrick, "I believe on my soul I'm back of Peel Hill. Here comes the accent." And with that, he took one leap onto the little island and put his horse up the sheer rock. Soon he stood, sure enough, at the top of Peel Hill. As he stood there, he cried out, "My blessing on the curlew! No man after this is to find her nest. My blessing on the goat, and no man is to see her bring forth her young. My blessing on the cock, and he shall crow at dawn even after at this same hour." He cursed the sea beast and turned him into a solid rock, and there he lies now with his great fin on his back. Where the horse's hooves struck the top of the hill, there sprang a well of pure water, of which man and horse drank, and it is called the Holy Well of St. Patrick to this day. If you go down to the ledges of the rock, which were made by the horse's hooves as he clambered up, you may see the footprints still. When Patrick looked about him, the mist was lifting, and he saw a great host of warriors round Manannan's fairy mount, with the first rays of the rising sun shining on their spears. But the saint knew they were phantoms raised by Manannan's magic power, and he bade them to be gone. And behold, they and their master, in the shape of three-legged men, whirled round and round like wheels before the swift wind, which could not overtake them till they came to Spanish Head. There they whirled over the Howes so quickly and lightly that the gulls on the ledges below were not disturbed. Then on, over the rough, grey Irish Sea, till they came to the enchanted island 15 miles southwest of the Calf. Once there, Manannan dropped the isle to the bottom of the sea, and he and his company were seen no more. St. Patrick, on his snow-white horse, stood still on Peel Hill and blessed the island where he had touched land, and blessed it has been to this day. Then he leapt on to the little islet that he saw below him. Ever since, it has been called St. Patrick's Isle, and from the rocks on its northern side he watched the fierce storm which Manannan's going had made. Just then a brave ship, with foresail and mainsail gone, was driving straight for the terrible rocks. St. Patrick raised his mailed hand, and the tempest was calmed. The good ship righted herself again, and those on board were saved. They looked up with awe and thankfulness at the rider in his shining armour on the snow-white steed, standing bright against the blackness of the rocks. And ever since that day, the fisherman, as he sails past the Horse Rock, has often doffed his cap and put up this bit of a prayer to good St. Patrick. St. Patrick, who blessed our island, bless us and our boat, going out well, coming in better, with living and dead in the boat.
That's kind of ominous. Living and dead in the boat.
I always take that to mean we come back, and also the fish who are dead come back with us.
You gonna tell them about the Coast Guard friends you've got? This is going to be a very interactive series of fairy tales.
It is. The two most disreputable friends I have are called Pete and Ori.
Let's see how long it takes this story to get back to them.
This is a lie. They're actually called Alan and Ori. But Alan has such an inherently Pete energy to him that at school, a now unfortunately departed friend of ours christened him Pete. And everyone thought he was just so inherently Peatish, including his mum, by the way. That's just stuck ever since. His wife calls him Pete. I'm fairly certain his kids call him Pete. You know? Are we having trouble with pickups?
Yeah, I'm just going to move the mic a little closer.
Cool. Anyway, these two, much like me, made it into their late 30s and were about as astonished at it as I was, and decided that the best possible thing they could do was, in short order, co-own a sports car which they have renovated, co-own a boat in which they once accidentally gate crashed location shooting for a movie version of Treasure Island. Stop and think about how high-end a movie version of Treasure Island attempting to persuade someone that the Irish Sea is the Caribbean would have to. Yeah, I know, right? And then they decided to become Coast Guards. Now, I was filled with admiration for them because I'm all about the first responders. I'm all about the emergency services. They're fucking great. And I was like, guys, this is really, really cool. What kind of stuff do you do? And Pete looked at me and went, well, sometimes we rescue dogs. Right, so what does that involve? It's really easy. You just abseil down a hill because the dog will have fallen down a hill. And you put a harness on it and then you winch it back up. And Ari kind of leans in at this point and goes, you do the same thing with sheep. And I'm like, okay, cool. What about other stuff? And they both looked a little shifty and they were like, we don't really do the big stuff. By big stuff, do you mean bodies? Yeah. What do you do with bodies? We just shove it out to sea and call a lifeboat. And that's how the Coast Guard works on the Isle of Man. I did find out later as well that basically, without going too grim, no one wants to pick up that particular awful job. So if a lifeboat find them, a lot of the time they'll just go, it's too near the coast, we can't possibly come and pick it up. Oh boys. And it becomes like a tug-of-war thing. Anyway, moving on.
You okay?
Yeah, I got a bit of a cough, that's all.
Alright, have some tea.
The Moddy-Doo, or the Black Dog of Peel Castle. In the days when Charles II was king in England and Charles, Earl of Derby, king in Man, Peel Castle was always garrisoned by soldiers. The guard room was just inside the great entrance gate of the castle, and a passage used to lead from it, through one of the old churches, to the captain of the guard's room. At the end of the day, one of the soldiers locked the castle gates and carried the keys through the dark passage to the captain. They'd take it in turns. About this time, One and another began to notice, sometimes in one room, sometimes in another, a big black dog with rough, curly hair. He did not belong to any person there, and nobody knew anything about him. But every night, when the candles were lighted in the guardroom and the fire was burning bright, he would come from the dark passage and lay himself down by the hearth. He made no sound, but lay there till the break of day. And then he would get up and disappear into the passage. The soldiers were terrified of him at first, but after a time they were used to the sight of him and lost some of their fear, though they still looked on him as something more than mortal. While he was in the room, the men were quiet and sober, and no bad words were spoken. When the hour came to carry the keys to the captain, two of them would always go together. No single man would face that dark passage alone. One night, however, one foolish fellow had drunk more than was good for him, and he began to brag and boast that he was not afraid of the dog. It was not his turn to take the keys, but to show how brave he was, he said that he would take them alone. He dared the dog to follow him. "Let him come," he shouted, laughing. "I'll see whether he be dog or devil." His friends were terrified and tried to hold him back, but he snatched up the keys and went out into the passage. The black dog slowly got up from before the fire and followed him. After there was a dead silence in the guardroom. No sound was heard but the dashing of the waves on the steep rocks of the castle islet. After a few minutes there came from the dark passage the most awful and unearthly screams and howls, but not a soldier dared to move to see what was going on. They looked at each other in horror. Presently they heard steps, and the rash fellow came back into the room, his face ghastly pale, twisted with fear. He spoke not a word then or afterwards. In 3 days he was dead, and nobody ever knew what had happened to him that fearful night. The black dog has never been seen again. Except it has. If you check the Wikipedia page that will be in the thread, you'll see several sightings up to the present day of the Modidu in various locations. Also, brilliantly, I think it's actually a bad guy in one of the Fire Emblem games.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, how neat.
And I think it's actually named as the Modidu.
Hmm? And the dog came back. Yeah, not good. Very good.
Okay, Tival, Princess of the Ocean.
Seriously?
Oh, why are you like this? In the old days, Cullen, the smith of the gods, was living in the Isle of Man. It was the time when Conchubar was at the court of the king of Ulster and had nothing but the sword in his hand. He was a fine, handsome young man, and he had made up his mind to make himself a king. So he went one day to the Druid of Clocher to ask him what he had best do. "Go thy way," said the Druid, "to the Isle of Man. There thou wilt find the great smith Cullen. Get him to make thee a sword and a spear and a shield, and with these thou shalt win the kingdom of Ulster." Conchubar went away, hired a boat, put out to sea. He landed in Man and made straight for Cullen's smithy. It was night when he got there, and the red glow of the furnace shone out into the dark. He could hear from inside the smithy the roar of the bellows and the clanging of the hammer on the anvil. When he came near, a great dog, as large as a calf, began to bay and to growl like thunder, and brought his master out. "Who art thou, young man?" said he. "Oh, Cullen," cried Conchubar, "it is from the Druid of Clocher that I come, and he bade me ask thee to make me a sword and a spear and a shield, for only with weapons of thy making can I win the kingdom of Ulster." Cullen's face grew black at first, but after he had gazed for a while at Conchubar, he saw that he had the look about him of one who would go far, and he said, "It shall be done for thee, but thou must wait. The work is long." So Cullen began to make the weapons, and Conchubar waited in the island. Early one brave morning in May, when the sun had just risen over Cronkin-Lurie-La, he was walking on the strand, wondering to himself how much longer Cullen would be making his weapons, and thinking it was full time for him to return. The tide was going out, and the sun was shining on the wet sand. Suddenly he saw something flashing at the edge of the waves a few paces from him. He ran up to it, and behold, it was the most beautiful woman he had ever put sight on, fast asleep. Her hair was golden like the gorse in bloom, her skin whiter than the foam of the sea, her lips red as the coral, and her cheeks rosy like the little clouds that were flying before the face of the rising sun. The fringe of her dress of many-coloured seaweeds rose and fell with the ebb and flow of the waves. Pearls gleamed on her neck and arms. Conchobar stood and looked on her. He knew that she was a mermaid, and that as soon as she awoke she would slip back into the ocean and be lost to him. So he bound her fast with his girdle.
Uh-oh.
And, yeah. Then she awoke and opened her eyes, which were blue as the sea, and when she saw that she was bound, she cried out with terror, "Loose me, man! Loose me!"
No. There's a request in the chat. You have to do a Valley Girl accent for the girl.
Okay, loose me, man. Loose me. Conchobar did not answer. I'll do it again. I'll put my meter on it. Ugh! Loose me.
There we go.
Conchobar did not answer, so she said again, "Loose me, I beg thee," in a voice as sweet as the music of Homor, the fairy fiddler. By this time, Conchobar was feeling that he would give all he had to keep her. He answered, trembling, "Woman, my heart, who art thou?" "I am Tival, princess of the ocean," said she. This is going well. She said, "Set me free, I pray thee." "But if I set thee free," said Conchobar, "thou wilt leave me." "I cannot stay with thee, Conchobar," she cried. "Set me free, I'll give you a precious gift." "I will loose thee," answered Conchobar. "It is not for the gift, but because I cannot resist thee." He unfastened the girdle from her, and she said, "My gift to thee is this. Go now to Cullen, who is making this shield or something, and tell him that Tival, princess of the ocean, bids him to put her figure on the shield, and round it to grave her name. Then thou shalt wear it always in battle, and when thou shalt look on my face and call my name, thy enemy's strength shall go from them, and shall come into thee and thy men." When she had said this, she waved her white arm to Conchobar, and plunged into the waves. He looked sadly for a long time at the spot where she had disappeared, and then walked slowly to the forge of Cullen, and gave him the message. Cullen finished the mighty shield, as the princess had said, and forged also for Conchobar a golden-hilted magic sword, and a spear set with precious stones. Then Conchobar, in his crimson mantle and white gold embroidered tunic, and armed with his great shield and his mighty weapons, went back to Ireland. All that the princess of the ocean had said came true. When he went into battle, he looked at the beautiful face in his shield and cried, "Help, Tival!" And in my mind, I will always hear her going, "Ugh, why are you like this? Fine." Then he felt strength come into him like the strength of a giant, and he cut his enemies down like grass.
Adventure!
Adventure! Before long, he was famous all over Ireland for his great deeds, and in the end, he became King of Ulster. Then he invited Cullen to come and live in his kingdom, and gave him the plain of Mirthmany to dwell in. But he never again saw the lovely mermaid.
Which is good, because he was creepy.
Because consent is a thing which apparently didn't happen back then. "I will just bind you with my girdle. I love you. Let me alone." Okay.
Can you not?
See, now every time I read the story, it will be Mamista. Just, ugh, fine.
Exactly.
Next up, the tall man of Ballacurry. By the way, every single one, I'm exaggerating nothing. Every single one of these place names is real. Tom Crane was going home at midnight from Bradda Mine to his home at Colby. The road was lonely and he met no person, but the full moon was shining and it was as light as day. As he began to pass under the trees that grow around the house at Ballacurry, a little dog appeared suddenly from the black shadow at the roadside and followed at his heels. He whistled to it, but as he turned his head to look at it, it ran on in front of him, and for a minute he did not see it. When he came in sight of it again, he was terrified to see it had grown larger, as big as a goat, and it grew bigger and bigger till it was the size of a donkey. It galloped before him and disappeared around the bend of the road where the gate of Ballacurry is. When Tom came to the gate, he saw a very tall, thin man leaning on it, with his arms folded on the top. The beast was not there. As Tom reached the gate, the tall, thin man turned and walked up the long path that led to the house. When he got to the door, he turned again and walked back down the path towards Tom. By the bright moonlight, Tom saw the lace ruffle round his neck, the satin of his knee breeches, the silk of his stockings, the shining buckles on his shoes, the dress of bygone days. His face was white and dreadful. As Tom looked, he was all at once taken with terror and ran off as hard as he could go down the road to Colby. He had not gone far when he met two of his friends, Bill Milcreast and Bill Tier. Okay, sidebar. This whole just running into your friends at random on a dark road at midnight on the Isle of Man, totally plausible. Actually happens all the time. Seriously. He told them what he had seen, and they made fun of him and would not believe that he had seen any such thing. They said they would go back with him to the gate, so they all three turned back. Also happens a lot. Are you doing anything? No. Do you want to go look at a spooky gate? Alright then, seriously. When they got to the gate, they saw the big man, as tall as two men, walking up the path with his back towards them. As before, when he reached the door, he turned. But what they saw, they never told any man. They took to their heels, all three, and ran till they could run no longer. They were trembling from head to foot, and the sweat pouring from them. They were too terrified to go home, so they turned in with Tom, and they slept, all three, in one bed. Two things about that, real quick. Firstly, the distance between Bradda Mines and Colby is non-trivial.
It's a heck of a run.
It's a heck of a walk. It's a drive. And I mean, I'm aware that I'm talking about the Isle of Man, which, you know, you can, and I have, walk the spine of in a day. But still, it's midnight and you've just done down the coal mine. It's going to take you a while, is what I'm saying. And second...
The chat is now fascinated by the fact that there was only one bed. This is turning into fan fiction that writes itself.
And secondly, seriously, Manx culture is actually there's a big part of it that is actually beautifully encapsulated in that story. And it's that, what are you doing? And there was a spooky thing. You want to go poke it? Yeah, alright. Seriously. I have had so many of my wacky high school adventures began with that. Or with variations on it. What you doing? I'm trying to turn the toaster into a bread cannon. What's in this bottle in the back of the car? Oh, that's possibly napalm. What's in the other bottle in the back of the car? I'm experimenting with petrol bombs. These are all conversations I've had. Let's move on. Joe Moore's story of Finn McCooley and the Pagain. This Finn McCooley was an Irish giant, and the Pagain was a Manx giant. But anyway, at all, this Finn comes across from the mountains of Mourne to see what was the Isle of Man like, for he was seeing land. He liked the island uncommon well, so he stopped in it, living out Cregnish way. The Pagain was hearing great talk about the great Finn McCooley that was in the Sound, so he came down from the top of Barrule to put a sight on him. Finn knew that he was coming to have a fight with him, to see who was best man, and Finn did not want to fight. Leave him to me, says the wife, and I'll put the arrow on him. Before long they caught sight of the Pagain, and he was a walking terror. He was coming from Barrule to them in a mighty pursue. That is absolutely what's written. The Pagain is doing a pursue. You're welcome. Slip in the cradle, Finn, says she. It's me that'll speak to him. Up comes the Pagain to the door, hot foot. Where's himself? Says he. This man is gone from home this bit, says she. What is it you want with him? There's no hurry on me. I'll put my foot inside and wait till he comes back, says he. Please yourself, says she, and you'll please me, but I must get on with my baking. Who have you got in the cradle? Says he. Oh, that's a babby, says she. And in the name of the unknown powers, what sort of a man is he himself, if his baby is this big? He's very big and powerful, says she. And the child is favouring the father. She was baking barley bread, and when the baking was done at her, she took the griddle and put it between two cakes of bread and gave it to the Pagain to eat, with a quart of buttermilk. He went to try and eat, and he couldn't. Oh, man alive, but this is the hard bread, says he. What sort have you given me at all? That's the sort I'm giving, Finn, says she. And will Finn's teeth go through this? Yes. Finn thought nothing at all of eating it. It's the sort of bread he was wanting, says Thrin. I love how we find out her name a page in. Finn got up out of the cradle and began to roar for a piece. She fetched him a clout on the lug. "Stop your noising," says she, "and stand straight. Don't be putting a drone on your back like that." And giving him a butter cake, she says, "Eat, eat, lash into ye, else they'll..." Let me see if I can get through this. "Eat, eat, lash into ye, and let's have no lavins." "You'll have the child's teeth broke in his head, woman. He can never eat bread as hard as that," said the Buggane. "I can do that with life," says she. Now that done the Buggane. He sleeched out and claned away again. He thought if Finn was that strong and the baby that big, he'd best catch home. But it was not long until the Buggane and Finn did meet, and they had the battle. One day Finn met the Buggane over at Kirk Christ Russian, and they went at each other early in the day till the sunset. Finn had one foot in the Big Sound, and so he made the channel between the Calf and Kitterland, and the other in the Little Sound, and so he made the narrow channel between Kitterland and the island. The Buggane was standing at Port Erin. That's what made the fine big opening there. The rocks were all broken to pieces with their feet, but anyway, the Buggane came off victorious and slashed Finn up something awful, so he had to run to Ireland. Now Finn, he could walk on the sea, but the Buggane couldn't. And when Finn got off and he couldn't get more revenge on him, he tore a tooth out and hove it, whizzing through the air after Finn. It hit him on the back of the head, and then it fell into the sea and became what we are now calling the Chicken's Rock. Finn turned round with a roar and a mighty curse. "My 7 swearings of a curse on it," says he. "Let it lie there for a vexation to the sons of men while water runs and grass grows." And a vexation and a curse had it been to seamen from that day to this. And with my profound apologies to the entire Irish nation.
He yeeted a tooth?
There's actually tooth yeetage, yes. Now, what you're probably starting to realise is there is a certain amount of ecology going on here. The Moddy-Doo may very well be the thing which is sighted at Ballacurry. The Buggane, the Manx giant, we're about to meet another version of. The Isle of Man has a mythical ecology of its own, by and large. And it's really interesting to see that be dealt with in different ways in these stories.
What is the Chicken Rock?
The Chicken Rock, this is very, very technical, is a rock that looks a little bit like a chicken that has a lighthouse on it.
Where?
It's,
Where's it?
I believe it's in, I want to say it's in Douglas Bay, but I'm not sure. I do know the location's in the thread.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because it has an entire page all to itself. But yeah, for a long time the Chicken Rock was a major shipwreck point. So they basically went, "You two, yeah, go stand in this lighthouse and yell at ships." And all right.
Wave a light around.
No.
But that's different from the Tower of Refuge, right?
Yes, the Tower of Refuge is in Douglas Bay, which is a very small tower. It's basically the mildly oceanic equivalent of the house halfway up Snowdon I was talking about last week, where instead of, "Oh, I'm very tired and it's snowing and I'm about to die," "Oh, look, Welsh cakes in a kettle." It's, "Oh my god, the ship is wrecked. Aye, quickly rush into this castle." Similar process, remarkably different ecology. Yeah, but I mean, all
Folks
these.
say it's by the calf.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah,
The Chicken Rock is by the calf.
yeah, the Calf of Man is the little baby island just off the coast of the Isle of Man,
And it looks like Hobbiton.
It does.
It looks like
It does.
the Shire. It's ridiculous and really, really pretty. And there's lots of water, and you wouldn't want to get anywhere near it because it's lots of different currents and rocks. And
you can actually see the current that boats basically just ride out to the Calf, and the current which they do their level best to avoid coming back from it.
Cool.
One more. The Buggane of St. Trinian's. A long time ago there came some monks to the broad, rough meadow which is between dark Greeba Mountain and the high road, and they chose a nice place and set up a church to St. Trinian on it. But they reckoned without the power of the Buggane, who had his haunt in the mountain. The Buggane was mighty angry, and he said to himself, "I'll have no peace night or day with their jingling bells if I let them finish the building." And as he had nothing else to do, he took it into his head to amuse himself by tossing off the roof. So when the roof of the church was first put on, there was heard that very night a dreadful sound in it, and when the people of Greeba got up early next morning, they found their church roofless, and planks and broken beams all around the place. After a time, and with great effort, the roof was put on again, But when it was on, a giant storm arose in the night, and it was blown down from the walls, exactly as it had happened before. This fall put fear in the people, for they were sure now that it was the evil, destructive Buggane himself that was doing the mischief. But though they were terrified, they resolved to make one more attempt, and the third roof was nearly finished. Yes, I knew tossing off the roof. You're welcome. Now, there was a brave little tailor living about a mile from Greba, and because he had not too much worldly gear, he made a wager that when the new roof was on, he would not only spend the first night in the church, but also make a pair of breeches there. The wager was taken up eagerly, as they hoped that if the roof was one night up, it would be left on. So Timothy, now that was the name of the little tailor, went to the church on the very first evening after the new roof had been put on. He started just when the shadow was beginning to get grey by the hedges. He took with him cloth, needle, thread, thimble and scissors. He entered the church boldly, lit a couple of big candles, and looked all over the building to see that everything was right. Then he locked the door so that there was no way to get in. He cut out the cloth, and seating himself cross-legged in the chancel, he put on his thimble, and he set to work at the breeches. He paid no heed to the darkness of the lonely church at dead of night, but with long thread and needle he bent low over his work, his fingers moving backwards and forwards rapidly, casting strange, beckoning shadows on the walls. The breeches had got to be finished, or he would lose his wager, so he stitched away as fast as he could, thinking about the good money the people would have to give him. The wind was beginning to rise, and trees scutched their arms against the windows. The tailor looked cautiously up and down and round about. Nothing strange came in sight, and he took courage. Then he threaded his needle and began his work again. He gave another sharp glance around, but saw nothing at all except the glimmer of the place near the candles, and empty, deep darkness away beyond them. So his courage rose high, and he said to himself, "It's all foolishness. That's the other people about the Buggane, for after all, alike, isn't it?" But at that very moment the ground heaved under him, and rumbling sounds came up from below. The sound grew louder underneath, and Timothy glanced quickly up. All of a sudden, a great big head broke through a hole in the pavement just before him, and came slowly rising up through the hole. It was covered with a mane of coarse black hair. It had eyes like torches and glittering sharp tusks, and when the head had risen above the pavement, the fiery eyes glared fiercely at Tim. The big, ugly, red mouth opened wide, and a dreadful voice said, "Thou rascal! What business hast thou here?" Tim paid no heed, but worked harder still, for he knew he had no time to lose. "Dost thou see this big head of mine?" yelled the Buggane. I see," replied Tim mockingly. Up came a big, broad pair of shoulders. Then a thick arm shot out, and a great fist shook at the tailor's face. "Dost thou see my long arms?" roared the voice. I see," answered Tim boldly, and he stopped his tailoring to snuff one of the guttering candles, and he threw the burning snuff in the scowling face before him. Then he went on with his tailoring. The Buggane kept rising and rising up through the hole, until the horrible form, black as ebony, covered with wrinkles like the leather of a blacksmith's bellows, had risen quite out of the ground. "Dost thou see this big body of mine?" roared the Buggane, angry that Tim showed no fear of him. I see," replied the tailor, at the same time stitching with all his might at the breeches. "Dost thou see my sharp claws?" roared the Buggane in a more angry voice than before. I see," answered the little tailor without raising his eyes, and continuing to pull out with all his might. "Dost thou see my cloven foot?" thundered the Buggane, drawing up one big foot and planking it down on the pavement with a thud that made the walls shake. I see," replied the little tailor as before, stitching hard at the breeches and taking long stitches. Lifting up his other foot, the Buggane in a furious rage yelled, "Dost thou see my rough arms, my bony fingers, my hard fists, my—" Before he could utter another syllable or pull the other foot out of the ground, The little tailor quickly jumped up and made 2 stitches together. The breeches were at last finished. Then, with one spring, he made a leap through the nearest window, but scarcely was he outside the walls when down fell the new roof with a terrible crash that made Tim jump a great deal more nimbly than he ever did before. Hearing the Bagane's fiendish guffaws of laughter behind him, he took to his heels and sped hot-foot along the Douglas Road, the breeches under his arms and the furious Bagane in full chase. The tailor made from a round church, only a little distance away, and knew he would be safe if he could only reach the churchyard. He ran faster still. He reached the wall. He leapt over it like a hunted hare and fell weary and spent upon the grass, under the shadows of the church, where the Bagane had no power to follow. So furious was the monster at this that he seized his own head with his 2 hands, tore it off his body, and sent it flying over the wall after the tailor. It burst at his feet with a terrific explosion, and with that the Bagane vanished and was never seen or heard of afterwards. Wonderful to relate, the tailor was not hurt, and he won the wager, for no person grumbled at the few long stitches put into the breeches. And for St. Trinian's Church, there is no name on it from that day till this, but Kiel Vrisht, broken church, for its roof was never replaced. There it stands in the green meadow under the shadow of rocky Greba Mountain, and there its grey roofless ruins are to be found even now. And that is Manx Fairy Tales.
The question was asked in the chat if this was a Manx Grinder profile. Don't you see my games? Oh, that's broken you.
I love how he's like, kadoosh, like, fine, give me a minute. So yeah, those are just some of the fairy tales. There's about another dozen in this from my profoundly weird little island. I hope you like them. Did they like them?
Yeah, they seem to have a lot of fun with them. There's a wide variety of them. I was kind of expecting the Manannan rolls the thing down the hill. He did it at first, but it was more about like the fog, and it was attributed to St. Patrick.
See, this is the really weird thing. The Manx national symbol is a triskelion. It's 3
Where's
legs.
your little flag?
Oh yeah, I used to have a little flag of it, which I think we've put in storage.
Yeah.
It's 3 legs, and the Manx national motto, if I remember correctly, translates as "However you throw me, I will stand."
The Caltrop flag.
We are a nation of caltrops. Which, it being me, I of course automatically associate with Buckaroo Banzai, and wherever you go, there you are, you know. I actually didn't know about the whole, the Triskelion was the thing which St. Patrick turned Manannan into, or Manannan's little kind of secret HQ thing going on, until I stumbled across this book. The version of the story I'd always been told is that Manannan is the Isle of Man's functional Merlin avatar. You know, he's the spirit of the island, lives on the mountain, the hill, and dissuaded invaders by rolling burning wheels down it, which is where the national symbol came from.
And it was never colonized by the Romans.
This is so cool. The Story of Man, which is the big interactive museum which is in Peel, and which, when I went there, was literally employing people to stand in a corridor and open doors. Like 100 meters of doors, like come in, come through, close the door, all this kind of stuff. It's actually a really good museum. Has as its prologue this kind of the history of the invasions of the Isle of Man. Now, Robert the Bruce invaded an awful lot, basically as a hobby. You know, he was bored of a weekend, and he'd come and have another go, and eventually he won. But, and you know, the Vikings basically retired there a lot of the time, done pillaging, you know. It says a lot about the fjords, doesn't it? My God, Sven, the rain is horizontal, the entire place is a hill, and the sheep look like the devil. It's so beautiful.
Oh, we haven't shown people what Manx sheep look like, have we?
Metal.
Oh,
Manx sheep look metal, is what they look like.
Let me find it.
But brilliantly, the Story of Man has this whole like big long prologue about all the great invasions of the Isle of Man. And then there is this 3 foot tall, very well designed plastic Roman figure on the wall with an enormous Perspex X in the front of it and a box that just reads, "The Romans never came here."